The girl stepped out of the dust like she had been born from it. "This key belongs to your father," she said, her voice steady despite the wind snapping at her braids. "He told me if anything happened, I had to find you." Caleb Whitmore didn't move. The cattle behind him shifted in the corral, iron chains clinking against cedar posts. The sun hung low over the Wyoming horizon, bleeding red across miles of dry grass and barbed wire. Caleb had been fixing a broken hinge on the north gate when she appeared on the ridge. No horse, no wagon, just a thin figure walking down from nowhere. "You're on the wrong ranch," Caleb said flatly. The girl walked closer. 10, maybe 11 years old, boots too big for her feet, dress torn at the hem, dirt streaked across her cheeks like war paint, but her eyes, dark, unblinking, held him the way a rifle sight does. "No, sir," she replied. "This is the Whitmore place, and you're Caleb." His jaw tightened. He hadn't heard his full name spoken that way in years, not since the war, not since the fire. The key rested in her palm, small, brass, old. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "My papa gave it to me." She swallowed, but didn't break eye contact. "Right before they shot him." The wind stopped. For a moment the entire prairie seemed to hold its breath. "Who's your father?" Caleb demanded. "Thomas Hale." The name struck like a hammer. Caleb hadn't spoken it in 15 years. Thomas Hale, his partner, his brother in everything but blood, the man who'd ridden with him when they first claimed this land, the man who vanished after the claim dispute turned ugly, the man Caleb told the world had abandoned him. "He's dead," Caleb muttered. "Yes, sir," the girl said softly. They made sure of it. Silence stretched between them like a drawn wire. Caleb stepped closer. "What's your name?" "Mary." "And where's your mother?" "She died in the winter." No tears, just fact. "You walk here alone?" "Yes, sir." "How far?" 40 miles. Caleb stared at her blistered hands, the cracked skin around her knuckles. 40 miles through cattle country, through Crane's territory. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "He said you'd say that." Something inside Caleb twisted. "Before we continue," the girl added suddenly, her voice shifting just enough to sound like she was repeating something memorized, "tell us in the comments from what town you are watching this from." Caleb blinked at her. She didn't smile, didn't explain. Then her voice returned to its original tone. "He said you'd try to send me away, said you'd tell yourself it wasn't your problem." Caleb felt heat rising under his collar. "What chest?" he asked quietly. Mary's fingers closed around the key. "In the barn," she said, "under the floorboards. Papa said you buried it the night everything changed." Caleb's heart slammed once against his ribs. Nobody knew about that. Nobody. Not even Thomas. Or so he had believed. "Why now?" Caleb demanded. "Why send you?" Mary's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "Because Mr. Crane found out." The name landed like a bullet. Virgil Crane. Largest cattle spread in 3 counties. Sheriff in his pocket, judge in his debt. The man who had tried to buy Caleb's land every year for a decade. The man Thomas had argued with the night before he disappeared. "What did Crane find?" Caleb asked. Mary stepped forward and pressed the key into his hand. "He found the truth." Her fingers were ice cold. Caleb looked down at the brass, dirt lodged in its grooves, blood maybe dried dark near the teeth. "He told me," she continued, "that when you open that chest, you'll understand why they killed him." Caleb's throat went dry. "And why they'll come for you next." A horse whinnied in the distance, not from his corral, from the ridge. Caleb slowly lifted his gaze. 3 riders stood silhouetted against the dying sun, watching, waiting. He closed his hand around the key. The past wasn't buried. It had just walked back onto his land. Caleb didn't look at the riders again. He didn't have to. 3 silhouettes on the ridge meant one thing in this territory. Crane. Mary stood beside him, too still for a child her age. "You led them here?" Caleb asked quietly. "No, sir." A pause. They were already following. The riders shifted their horses. One lifted a hand, not in greeting, in warning. Caleb turned and walked toward the barn without another word. "Stay close," he muttered. Mary followed. The barn doors groaned when he pulled them open. The smell of hay, dust, and old oil wrapped around them. Evening light cut through the cracks in thin golden blades. Caleb crossed to the far corner. For 15 years he had not stepped there. The boards looked no different than the rest, sun-bleached pine, worn smooth by time, but he knew exactly which plank creaked under pressure. Mary stopped behind him. "You buried it deep," she said softly. Caleb shot her a sharp look. "How do you know that?" "Papa told me everything." He knelt and drove the claw of a hammer between two boards. Wood splintered, nails screamed. He ripped one plank free, then another. Beneath them, dirt, hard packed. Caleb dug with his bare hands. Mary didn't move, didn't blink. Outside, a horse snorted. Then a voice drifted through the barn wall. "Evenin', Whitmore." Caleb froze. Virgil Crane's voice was smooth as polished stone. "Long ride for visitors," Caleb called back, not standing. "We heard you had company." Boots hit dirt outside the barn. Mary's fingers tightened in her dress. Caleb dug faster. His knuckles tore. Soil filled his nails. The shovel he kept by the stall would have been easier, but slower, and he didn't have time. Crane's shadow slid under the door. "You always did like burying things," Crane continued. "Land claims, partnerships, truth." Caleb's hand struck wood. Solid. He cleared dirt away. A small iron-bound chest, no bigger than a saddlebag trunk. Mary stepped forward. "That's it." Caleb dragged it free and set it on the barn floor. Dust rose around them. "Open it," Mary whispered. Crane laughed softly from outside. "You don't want to do that, Caleb." Caleb ignored him. He slid the brass key from his pocket. For a split second, his hand trembled. He hadn't buried money. He hadn't buried gold. He had buried a decision. The key slid into the lock. Outside, Boots approached the barn doors. "Careful now," Crane called. "Some secrets ain't worth unearthing." Caleb turned the key. The lock clicked. The barn fell silent. Even the cattle stopped shifting. He lifted the lid and went completely still. No breath, no curse, no movement at all. Mary stepped beside him and looked down into the chest. Her face didn't change. Outside, Crane's voice lost its humor. "Well?" Caleb's eyes never left what lay inside. Paper, stacks of paper, deeds, signed, stamped, not by Caleb, not by Thomas, by the territorial judge, the original land grant, the entire valley, signed over to Thomas Hale, not Whitmore. Hale. Caleb's name appeared only once, as witness, nothing more. Beneath the deeds sat a leather-bound ledger. Caleb knew that book. He had burned what he thought were the only copies. But here it was. Every cattle shipment, every bribe, every forged transfer Crane had forced through the county office, every threat made against Thomas Hale, documented in ink, signed by Crane's own hand. Proof. Proof that Crane never legally owned a single acre he claimed. Proof that Thomas Hale had refused to sell. Proof that Caleb had lied to the town for 15 years. Outside, silence. Crane knew. He knew what was in that chest. "You always were the weaker one, Caleb," Crane said, voice sharp now. "Thomas wanted to fight. You wanted to survive." Mary looked up at Caleb. "Papa said you chose wrong." Caleb swallowed. The riders dismounted. Boots crunched toward the barn. "Close it," Crane barked. "We'll settle this like men." Caleb slowly lowered the lid. He stood. For the first time since Mary appeared, he looked older. Not broken, not scared. Resolved. "You killed him," Caleb said. Crane didn't deny it. He wouldn't sign. "And now?" Crane stepped into the doorway, revolver resting easy in his palm. "Now you will." Mary didn't scream, didn't move. Caleb placed one hand behind him, shielding her without looking. The prairie wind rose outside, sharp and cold. Crane lifted the gun. Caleb's eyes never left him. And then Mary spoke. "You forgot one thing, Mr. Crane." Crane's eyes flicked down to her. "What's that, little girl?" Mary stepped forward into the fading light. "My father never trusted you." She reached into her dress. Crane's finger tightened on the trigger, and Caleb realized, too late, this wasn't just about a chest. Mary's hand came out of her dress slowly, not with a gun, with a folded piece of paper. Crane hesitated, just a fraction. Caleb saw it. Mary held the paper up. "You're looking for this?" she said. Crane's jaw tightened. "That's mine," he replied calmly. "No, sir," Mary answered. "It was my father's." Caleb felt the ground shift under him. "What is it?" he asked. Mary didn't look at him. "It's the original claim to the north pasture," she said. "The one you tried to file twice." Crane's smile thinned. You don't know what you're talking about. Mary unfolded the paper. The territorial seal caught the last light of day. Caleb recognized the signature instantly. Judge Harland, long dead, official, legitimate, and under the seal, a second notation, a lien, filed against Virgil Crane for fraud and coercion, dated the week Thomas disappeared. Caleb's pulse thundered. You filed against him, he whispered. Mary nodded once. Papa said if anything happened to him, I was to give this to you. He said you were the only one stubborn enough to finish what he started. Crane's revolver lifted fully now. You think paper means anything out here? He asked coldly. Out here, I am the law. One of his riders stepped inside the barn, then another. 3 guns against 1. Mary didn't move. Papa said you'd say that too, she said. Crane's eyes narrowed. And what else did he say? Mary's voice stayed steady. He said the men riding with you aren't as loyal as you think. Crane's head tilted slightly. Behind him, one rider shifted. Just enough. Caleb saw it. Crane didn't. Thomas Hale kept records, Mary continued. Every payment you made to burn barns, every threat, every name. Crane's voice hardened. There are no records. Mary looked down at the chest. There are now. The silence inside the barn grew heavy. Caleb understood. The ledger, the deeds, the lien. It wasn't just land. It was leverage. Crane's empire was built on fear, not ownership. Paper meant nothing until someone was willing to use it. Crane cocked the hammer back. You think I won't shoot a child? He asked quietly. Mary didn't flinch. You already shot my father. The words landed clean. No tremor, no tears, just truth. Caleb stepped slightly forward, drawing Crane's focus. You kill us, Caleb said, and every rancher in 3 counties learns why Thomas disappeared. Crane laughed once. From who? Caleb lifted the ledger. From me. Crane's eyes flicked to it. That was the mistake. The rider behind him moved, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to put space between himself and Crane. Caleb saw doubt ripple through the other 2 men. Fear changes loyalty. Crane sensed it. You boys best remember who feeds your families, he snapped. But the certainty in his voice had cracked. Mary took one small step closer. Papa said power only works when people believe in it. Crane's gaze darted between them. The barn suddenly felt smaller. Too small, too exposed. Outside, hooves shifted nervously. Wind pushed dust through the open door. Caleb lowered the ledger slightly. You ride out now, he said evenly, and this stays between us until morning. And if I don't? Crane asked. Caleb met his eyes. Then tomorrow every man who ever lost land to you sees what's in this chest. The riders exchanged glances. Crane's finger rested tight on the trigger. A long second passed, then another. Mary didn't blink. Crane finally lowered the gun, not all the way, but enough. This isn't over, he said quietly. It is for tonight, Caleb replied. Crane backed toward the barn door. His men followed. No one turned their backs first. Outside, saddles creaked, hooves pounded. The riders disappeared into the darkening prairie. Silence swallowed the barn. Caleb exhaled slowly for the first time since Mary arrived. He looked down at her. You could have gotten us both killed, Mary nodded. Yes, sir. He studied her face, Thomas's eyes, Thomas's stubbornness. You really walked 40 miles alone? Yes, sir. He glanced at the chest. You knew what was in here. Yes, sir. Why didn't you open it yourself? Mary looked at the key still in his hand. Because it wasn't mine to carry. Caleb stared at her. Then at the deeds. Then at the lien. Then at the ledger. 15 years of silence, 15 years of guilt, 15 years of letting a dead man take the blame. You were right, he said quietly. Mary tilted her head. About what? I chose wrong. He picked up the chest, closed it firmly, then turned toward the house. Come on, he said. Mary didn't move. There's one more thing, she said softly. Caleb paused. What? Mary looked toward the ridge where Crane had stood. Papa said when you opened the chest, you'd finally understand who your father really was. Caleb frowned. My father? Mary nodded. Yes, sir. She stepped past him and reached into the chest one last time. From beneath the ledger, she pulled a smaller envelope Caleb hadn't noticed, sealed, addressed to him, in Thomas Hale's handwriting. Caleb felt his stomach drop. He took the envelope slowly. It was thinner than he expected. Lighter. He broke the seal, unfolded the single page inside, read the first line, and went completely silent. The wind moved through the barn. Mary watched his face carefully. He didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't breathe. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. Finally, in a voice that sounded like it didn't belong to him, Caleb whispered, "That's not possible." Mary's eyes didn't leave his. "It is." Caleb read the first line again, then the second. His vision blurred, but not from tears, from impact. Mary waited. Outside, night settled over the prairie like a closing fist. "What does it say?" she asked quietly. Caleb swallowed. "It says, Thomas wasn't my partner." Mary didn't react. Caleb's eyes moved over the page once more. "He wasn't just my partner," Caleb corrected, his voice rough. "He was my brother." Mary's brow furrowed slightly. "You already said that." "No," Caleb whispered. "Not like that." He lowered the paper just enough for her to see the first sentence. "Caleb, if you're reading this, then I reckon I never got the courage to tell you face to face. Your father wasn't the man you think he was." The air shifted. Caleb's hand tightened around the page. "My father died in Kansas," he muttered. "Fever took him." Mary shook her head slowly. "That's what they told you." Caleb's heart pounded in his ears. He forced himself to keep reading. "Your mother never knew the truth." "Crane did. That's how he kept me quiet for so long." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What truth?" Mary pressed. Caleb read aloud now because the silence was worse. "Your father didn't die of fever. He died because he stood in Crane's way, same as me." The barn seemed to shrink. Caleb felt something ancient crack inside his chest. "That's a lie," he said automatically. Mary didn't argue. "Papa said you'd say that too," Caleb continued. "He tried to expose Crane 20 years ago, had proof of forged claims even back then. Crane caught wind of it. Your father never made it to town to file." Caleb's breath came shorter. The paper trembled harder now. "I stayed silent because Crane showed me the contract transferring your mother's homestead into his holdings if I didn't. He said accidents happen to stubborn men. He proved it once. I believed him." Caleb closed his eyes. Memory shifted. His father riding out one morning, saying he'd settle something in town, never returning. The sheriff calling it sickness, a quick burial, no questions. "You knew?" Caleb asked Mary. She nodded. "Papa found the old records when he was checking Crane's filings. He started digging. That's when Crane started watching us." Caleb looked at her sharply. "He told you all this?" "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" "Old enough." Caleb almost laughed, but nothing in him felt light enough for that. He looked back at the letter. "I didn't tell you because I needed you safe. Angry men die quick. Careful men survive long enough to matter." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You survived, Caleb. Now it's your turn to matter." The last line hit hardest. "If I'm gone, it means Crane decided I'd found too much. The ledger proves it. The lien protects the land. But the truth about your father, that's what will make you choose." Caleb lowered the page slowly. "Choose." Mary studied his face. "Papa said this would be the part where you stop running." Caleb turned toward the open barn door. The ridge was dark now, but he could still see it, see the place where Crane had stood, see the path his father once rode. "They killed him," Caleb said quietly, not asking. "Yes, sir." "And Thomas knew for years." "Yes, sir." "And he kept quiet." Mary's voice softened. "He was protecting you." Caleb let out a long breath. For 15 years he had believed Thomas abandoned him for money, believed Thomas sold out, believed Thomas walked away. Instead, Thomas had stayed, taken the threats, carried the burden alone, and died for it. Caleb folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, then slid it into his coat. He walked to the chest, closed it fully, locked it. Mary watched every movement. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Caleb stepped toward the doorway. The night wind hit his face, cold, clear. "Tomorrow," he said evenly, "we ride to town." Mary's eyes narrowed slightly. "To file the lien?" "Yes." "And the ledger?" "Yes." "And tell them about your father?" Caleb paused. The town had believed Crane for 2 decades. The sheriff owed him favors. The judge owed him cattle. The ranchers feared him. Truth wasn't enough. It needed force behind it. Caleb looked down at Mary. "Tomorrow," he repeated. "But tonight?" He stepped out of the barn and scanned the horizon one more time. "We prepare." Mary nodded once. Then she asked the question she'd been holding back since she arrived. "If Crane comes back before morning?" Caleb's expression changed. Not anger, not fear, something colder. "He won't," Caleb said quietly. "How do you know?" Caleb looked toward the ridge. "He knows what's in that chest." Mary didn't speak. Caleb's voice lowered. "And he knows what I just learned." The prairie went completely still. For the first time since she arrived, Mary allowed herself a small breath. "Papa said once you knew," she whispered, "you wouldn't hesitate." Caleb didn't answer. He walked toward the house. Mary followed. Behind them, inside the barn, under iron and lock, the chest sat silent. But the wind shifted again, and somewhere out in the dark, a match struck. The smell hit Caleb before he saw it. Smoke, not from the stove, not from the forge, from the barn. Mary stopped mid-step. "So he did come back," she said quietly. Caleb was already moving. He sprinted across the yard, boots pounding hard-packed dirt. Flames licked along the barn's east wall, thin at first, then spreading fast through old timber and dry hay. "Stay back," he barked. Mary didn't argue this time. Caleb grabbed the water barrel by the trough and hurled it against the siding. Steam hissed. Fire climbed higher, inside, the chest. He lunged through the open barn door. Heat slammed into him. Flames crawled along the rafters like living things. One stall was already engulfed. A horse screamed, panicked, kicking against its gate. Caleb cut the latch with his knife and slapped the animal hard, driving it toward the exit. The chest sat where he'd left it. Fire hadn't reached it yet. Not quite. He tore his coat off, wrapped it around his hands, and ran for it. Behind him, something cracked. A support beam splitting under heat. He grabbed the chest. Heavy, too heavy. He staggered. Another beam gave way. Flaming debris crashed down, sparks exploding across the dirt floor. Caleb shoved the chest ahead of him, dragging it through smoke so thick it burned his lungs raw. Outside, Mary moved, not screaming, not frozen. She ran to the pump, working the handle with every ounce of strength she had, throwing bucket after bucket toward the door to carve a wet path for him. Caleb burst out of the smoke, collapsing onto the ground with the chest still clutched against his ribs. The roof gave way seconds later. The barn caved inward in a roar of flame. Mary dropped beside him. "You got it?" she asked. Caleb coughed hard, nodding once. The barn burned high against the night sky. A message. Crane didn't intend to wait until morning. Mary looked toward the ridge. "They wanted the papers," she said. "No," Caleb rasped, pulling himself upright. "They wanted me dead with them." Mary's eyes shifted. Movement, not at the ridge this time. Closer. Hoofbeats, fast, 3 riders, no lanterns, no warning. "They're coming back," she said. Caleb stood. The chest lay between them. Open land stretched behind the house. No cover, no escape on foot. Crane rode at the front, gun already drawn. "You should have burned with it," Crane shouted over the thunder of hooves. Caleb shoved the chest toward Mary. "Take it inside," he ordered. Mary didn't hesitate. She dragged it toward the porch steps just as the riders closed the distance. Crane fired first. The shot split the night. Caleb dove behind the water trough as splinters exploded from the porch railing. Another shot, closer. Crane's men fanned out, trying to box him in. "You think paper saves you?" Crane roared. Caleb reached under the trough and pulled free the rifle he'd stashed there years ago. Loaded, oiled, waiting. He rolled, sighted once, and fired. One rider dropped instantly from his saddle. The horse bolted. Crane swore, pulling hard on his reins. The second rider fired wildly, bullet tearing through the house shutters. Mary was inside now, safe, for the moment. Caleb fired again. The second rider jerked sideways, slumping low but still hanging onto the saddle horn. Crane wheeled his horse wide, trying to flank. "You always were slow, Whitmore," he shouted. Caleb didn't answer. He moved. Low, controlled. He knew this land better than any man alive. Crane charged straight toward him, revolver flashing. Caleb waited. 10 yards. 8, 6. Crane raised the gun. Caleb fired. The shot hit Crane's horse square in the chest. The animal collapsed mid-stride, throwing Crane hard into the dirt. Crane rolled, came up on one knee, revolver still in hand. They fired at the same time. Caleb felt heat tear past his shoulder. Crane's hat flew off, bullet grazing his temple. Both men froze for half a second, breathing hard, gun smoke curling between them. "Your father died begging," Crane spat. Caleb's vision went razor sharp. "You lie," he said quietly. Crane smiled through blood at his hairline. "You think Hale told you everything? You think he was protecting you?" Caleb stepped forward, rifle steady. Crane's revolver trembled slightly now. "You killed him," Caleb said. "Yes." No hesitation. "And your father." Silence fell heavy. Crane laughed once. They both thought paper could beat power. He lifted his revolver again. Caleb didn't give him a second chance. The rifle cracked. Crane's body jerked, then went still. Dust settled slowly around him. The last rider, wounded, turned his horse and fled into the darkness without another word. Silence returned. Only the barn burned. Caleb stood there a long moment, then lowered the rifle. Mary stepped onto the porch, face pale but steady. "Is he?" "Yes," Caleb answered. She nodded once. No celebration, no relief, just understanding. The flames behind them began to die down as the structure collapsed fully into embers. Mary walked down the steps, stopped beside Crane's body. "He told Papa you were weak," she said quietly. Caleb looked at her. "Was I?" Mary considered that, then shook her head. "No, sir." The wind shifted again, carrying smoke away from the house, carrying the past with it. Caleb looked toward town, miles away in the dark. "Tomorrow," he said. Mary nodded. "Yes, sir." He picked up the chest, heavy, but no longer unbearable. Behind them, the last beam of the barn fell inward with a final crack of sparks, and the night went still. Dawn came cold and colorless. Smoke still curled from the blackened skeleton of the barn. The air smelled of wet ash and burned cedar. Caleb hadn't slept. Neither had Mary. The chest sat on the kitchen table now, cleaned of soot, iron bands dull in the gray morning light. The ledger lay open beside it, the deeds stacked carefully, the lien folded flat. Mary stood at the window, watching the horizon. "You think they'll come?" she asked. "They always come when there's noise," Caleb replied. He meant the town. Gunshots carried, flames carried farther. By mid-morning they heard the first wagon, then another. Ranchers, curious, cautious, armed. Caleb stepped out onto the porch as 3 men rode into the yard. Henderson, Old Man Pike, and Sheriff Rollins. Rollins' eyes went straight to the burned barn. "What happened?" he demanded. Caleb didn't look at him. Crane. The name shifted the air. Henderson's jaw tightened. Pike spat in the dirt. "Where is he?" Rollins asked. Caleb stepped aside slightly. Crane's body still lay where it had fallen, covered now, but unmistakable. Rollins dismounted slowly. He pulled back the blanket. Silence stretched long. "You shot him," Rollins said flatly. "Yes." "Witnesses?" Mary stepped forward. "I saw it." Rollins looked down at her. "And who are you?" "Mary Hale." The name moved through the 3 men like a current. Henderson's face changed first. "Hale?" he muttered. "Thomas Hale." "Yes, sir." Pike looked at Caleb sharply. "Thought he ran off." "So did I," Caleb answered. Rollins straightened slowly. "This ain't something I can just overlook." Caleb nodded once. "I don't expect you to." He turned and walked back inside, left the door open. Mary followed. Rollins hesitated, then stepped in after them, Henderson and Pike close behind. The kitchen felt small with 5 grown men inside. Caleb placed the ledger on the table, opened it, turned it toward Rollins. "Read." Rollins frowned but leaned in. The pages flipped slowly. Payment records, threats documented, signatures. Crane's name repeated again and again. Henderson stepped closer. Color drained from his face. "That's my place," he whispered, seeing a map sketch. "That's my north fence line." Pike swore under his breath. Rollins flipped further, then stopped at the lien. He read it twice. "This was filed," he said quietly. "Yes." "Never processed." "No." Because Crane owned the Clerk," Caleb finished. Silence filled the room. Mary watched each man carefully. "You all knew," she said softly. No one answered. Rollins closed the ledger. Even if this is true, he began slowly, you still shot a man. He was armed, Mary replied. Rollins' eyes shifted to her again. And he burned our barn, she added. Pike exhaled hard. I lost my east pasture 5 years back, he muttered. Signed under pressure, Henderson nodded. So did I. Rollins looked between them. Fear had ruled this valley for 20 years. Paper alone wouldn't break it, but fear works both ways. Caleb stepped forward. You ride into town today, he said evenly, with this ledger and this lien. You file it proper, you post it public, and you let every rancher read it. Rollins held his gaze. And if I don't? Caleb didn't blink. Then I ride to Cheyenne. The room stilled. Cheyenne meant territory officials, means beyond Crane's reach. Henderson spoke first. I'm riding, Pike nodded. Me too. Rollins looked at Crane's body through the open door, then at the burned barn, then at Mary. You're sure about all this? He asked her. Mary didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Rollins studied her face, saw Thomas in it. He sighed slowly. All right. He closed the ledger firmly. We ride. By noon, half the valley had gathered. Word spread faster than smoke. Crane was dead. The ledger was real. The lien was filed. The sheriff rode ahead with it visible in his saddlebag. Caleb stood on the porch beside Mary as the small procession moved down the dirt road toward town. You think they'll stand firm? She asked. They will today, Caleb said. And tomorrow? Caleb looked down at her. Tomorrow they'll remember who Crane was. Mary nodded. And who your father was. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. Yes. She looked toward the horizon where the riders disappeared into heat shimmer. You're not running anymore, she said. No. The wind moved gently across the yard. No smoke now, just open land. Mary turned back toward the house. There's something else in the chest, she said quietly. Caleb frowned. I checked it. Not everything. She walked inside. Caleb followed. Mary knelt beside the table and reached under the false bottom Thomas had built years ago, a detail only someone told about it would know. She pressed. The wood shifted. A thin envelope slid free. Caleb stared at it. That wasn't there before, he muttered. Yes, sir, Mary said. Papa said this one was for after. After what? After Crane. Caleb took the envelope slowly. It was lighter than the first. No seal this time. Just one folded sheet. He opened it. Read silently. Mary watched his face again. The change came fast. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something deeper. What is it? She asked. Caleb's voice came low. It says, he swallowed once. It says you're not Thomas's daughter. Mary didn't move. He says, Caleb continued, eyes fixed on the page, you're mine. Silence fell so hard it felt physical. Mary blinked once. That's not possible, she said quietly. Caleb looked at her. The age, the timing. The year Thomas disappeared for 6 months. The winter Caleb drank too much and tried to forget a woman in a small town near the rail line. Memory shifted into place like a final piece of iron locking into gear. The wind outside picked up again. Mary's voice stayed steady. Papa said when you found out, she whispered, you'd finally understand why he chose to protect you. Caleb's hands lowered slowly. The paper trembled. Mary's eyes never left his. And for the first time since she arrived, he didn't know what to say. Mary didn't step back. She didn't cry. She just stood there, watching Caleb as if the answer to her entire life rested in the way he breathed. That's a lie, Caleb said finally, but the words lacked force. Mary's expression didn't change. Is it? She asked. Caleb looked down at the letter again. Thomas's handwriting was steady to the very last line. Caleb, I never married. You know that. The girl's mother came through town the year you tried to drink yourself into the ground. You remember her. You left before winter. She didn't. Caleb's jaw clenched. He remembered. A woman with tired eyes and a stubborn streak, passing through after her husband died on the railroad line. He had been angry that year, angry at Crane, angry at Thomas, angry at the world. He had stayed 3 nights, left before sunrise on the 4th. I would have told you sooner, the letter continued, but by the time I knew for certain, Crane was already circling. If he'd learned the girl was yours, he'd have used her same as he used your father. Caleb's throat tightened. Mary watched him carefully. Did you know? He asked her quietly. She shook her head once. Papa said he'd tell me when I was older. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the last of the ranchers disappeared down the road toward town. The valley felt different already, lighter. But inside the kitchen, the air grew heavier. Caleb folded the letter slowly. You believe Thomas was your father, he said. Yes, sir. And he let you? Mary nodded. He said blood isn't what makes a man stay. That landed hard. Caleb looked at her properly now, not as a messenger, not as a reminder of the past, but as a child who had walked 40 miles alone, a child who had watched her father die, a child who stood steady in a gunfight. How old are you? He asked again. 11. The number hit him like a delayed shot. 11 years ago. The winter he tried to forget. The same year Thomas vanished for months, handling business. You raised her, Caleb muttered, almost to himself. Mary's voice softened. He said you weren't ready. Caleb almost smiled at that. He wasn't wrong. Silence settled again. Mary finally asked the question neither of them wanted to touch. So what happens now? Caleb looked toward the burned barn, toward Crane's body still waiting for burial, toward the road leading to town. I don't know, he admitted. Mary stepped closer. Are you sending me away? The question was calm, prepared, as if she'd rehearsed surviving that answer too. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, not guilt this time, responsibility. You walked 40 miles to hand me a key, he said slowly. You stood in front of a gun. You carried your father's truth. Mary held his gaze. And I won't send you anywhere. Her face didn't light up, didn't break, but something in her shoulders eased. You sure? She asked. No, Caleb said honestly, but I'm done running from what's mine. The wind rattled the kitchen window. Mary glanced down at the chest. There's more, she said quietly. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? Mary knelt again and reached inside the false bottom. This time, she pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth, long, heavy. She placed it on the table and unwrapped it carefully. A revolver. Old. Well kept. Caleb recognized it instantly. His father's. He hadn't seen it since the day they buried him. I thought it was lost, he whispered. Mary shook her head. Crane took it. Papa stole it back when he found out. Caleb picked it up slowly. The weight was familiar. The grip worn smooth in the same places. Another lie unraveled. Another piece of history returned. Thomas kept everything, Caleb said. Yes, sir. And gave it back when it mattered. Mary nodded. He said you'd need it one day. Caleb looked down at the revolver, then at her. I hope not. Mary met his eyes evenly. You will. The words weren't dramatic. They were certain. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the plains, not from a storm. From town, multiple gunshots. Caleb and Mary both turned toward the sound. It came again, faint, but unmistakable. Caleb's expression hardened instantly. That's not celebration, he said. Mary's voice stayed level. No, sir. Another distant crack echoed through the valley. Caleb grabbed the rifle from beside the door, slung the revolver at his hip. He looked at Mary. You stay here. She shook her head immediately. No, Mary, I'm not staying behind again. The thunder of gunfire rolled once more, closer this time. Caleb hesitated only a second, then nodded. Fine. You ride behind me. Don't stop. Don't speak unless I tell you. Yes, sir. They moved fast. Saddled the remaining horse. Caleb swung up first, then pulled Mary behind him. The chest stayed on the table, the letters inside. The truth laid bare. As they rode toward town, smoke began to rise in the distance, not from one building, from several. Mary tightened her grip around Caleb's coat. They're trying to burn the records, she said quietly. Caleb's jaw locked. Crane might be dead, but men like him didn't build empires alone. The town came into view over the ridge, and what Caleb saw made his blood run cold. Half the street was in chaos. Sheriff Rollins lay face down in the dirt. Henderson's horse ran riderless. And standing in the center of town square, a man Caleb had buried 10 years ago, hat low, scar across his cheek, very much alive. Caleb's breath stopped. Mary leaned slightly to see past his shoulder. "Do you know him?" she asked. Caleb's voice came out hoarse. "Yes." "Who is it?" Caleb didn't take his eyes off the figure. "That's my father." The horse slowed on its own as they reached the edge of town. Caleb didn't. He nudged it forward. His father stood in the middle of Main Street, dust swirling around his boots. Same posture, same rigid shoulders. Older, harder, but unmistakable. Mary's grip tightened. "You said he was dead," she whispered. "He was supposed to be." Gunsmoke hung low between the buildings. 2 stores burned at the far end of the street. Ranchers who had ridden in that morning were scattered, some behind wagons, some disarmed on their knees, and at the center of it all, Elias Whitmore, Caleb's father, alive. Rollins lay motionless near the water trough. The ledger was gone. Caleb slid off the horse slowly, helping Mary down behind him. Elias turned at the sound. Their eyes met across the dirt road. For a moment, the chaos of town seemed to dull. "You took your time," Elias said evenly. Caleb felt something fracture inside his chest. "You're dead," he answered. Elias shrugged slightly. "Men like me don't die easy." Mary stared at him. "You let them bury you," she said. Elias's eyes flicked to her. "And who's this?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward. "You killed Crane?" "No," Elias replied calmly. "You did." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed his face. "I heard the shots from the ridge," Elias continued. "Figured it was time to clean up what he left behind." Behind him, 4 armed men stood in a loose line. Not ranchers, not locals, hired. "You burned the town?" Caleb demanded. Elias glanced over his shoulder at the smoke. "Sacrifices have to be made. Records disappear in fire. Witnesses too." Caleb's stomach dropped. "You were the one behind it," he said slowly. "Behind what?" "Everything." Elias didn't deny it. Crane had been loud, brutal, obvious, but Elias had been silent, missing, untouched. "You and Crane worked together," Caleb said. "For a time," Elias admitted, "until he grew greedy." Mary stepped forward slightly. "He killed my father." Elias studied her. "No," he said evenly. "I did." The words struck like a physical blow. Caleb's hands clenched. "Thomas figured it out," Elias continued. "Figured out the old claims, the forged transfers, the disappearances. He was smarter than Crane. That made him dangerous." I let you believe what kept you alive," Elias cut in. "Same as Hale did." Mary's voice trembled for the first time. "Why?" Elias looked at her almost curiously. "Because land isn't owned by paper. It's owned by whoever's willing to spill blood for it." Caleb felt the revolver heavy at his hip. "You killed your partner," he said. "Yes." "You killed men who trusted you." "Yes." "You killed Thomas." "Yes." No hesitation, no regret. "And you would have killed me," Caleb said quietly. Elias's gaze sharpened. "If you'd stepped in my way." Silence swallowed the street. Smoke rolled between buildings. One of Elias's men dragged Henderson forward roughly, shoving him to his knees. "Ledger's gone," the man called out. "Sheriff's dead." Mary looked up at Caleb. "He wants it erased," she whispered. Caleb understood now. Crane had been muscle. Elias had been architect. Disappear. Let Crane take the hate. Let Crane build the fear. Then step back in once the ground was clear. "You planned this," Caleb said, "for 20 years. Elias nodded once. "Since before your father rode to town that morning. The world seemed to tilt. You—" "Yes," Elias said. "I stopped him on the road. He wasn't sick, Caleb. He was stubborn." Caleb's breathing slowed, dangerously slow. Mary looked between them. "Then who buried him?" she asked. Elias's mouth curved faintly. "Men see what they're told to see." Caleb stepped forward. "You built your empire on lies." "I built it on foresight," Elias corrected. "Crane was useful. Hale was predictable. You were soft." Mary's voice cut through. "He's not soft." Elias's eyes returned to her. "No," he agreed after a moment, "not anymore." Gunshots cracked again from the far end of town, stray resistance being silenced. Elias lifted his hand slightly. His men raised their weapons. "It ends today," Elias said calmly. "All of it. The claims, the stories, the questions. Caleb felt the revolver at his hip, felt Mary behind him, felt 20 years of deception tightening like a rope. "You faked your death to avoid exposure," Caleb said. "I erased myself to become untouchable. And now," Elias's voice dropped, "now I take back what's mine." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It was never yours." Elias stepped forward. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was." Wind tore down the street, carrying sparks through the air. Mary's voice was steady again. "Papa said power only works when people believe in it." Elias smiled faintly. "Your papa was wrong." Caleb's hand moved, not yet to his gun, but close. Elias noticed. "You gonna shoot your own father?" he asked. The question hung heavy in the smoke-filled street. Mary's fingers tightened against Caleb's back. Behind Elias, Henderson coughed weakly in the dirt. The town burned. The past stood 10 yards away. Caleb's voice came low. "You were dead to me a long time ago." Elias's eyes hardened. "That's not the same thing." The wind pushed smoke between them like a living wall. Elias stood calm inside it. Caleb felt his heartbeat steady instead of race. "You always needed someone else to pull the trigger," Caleb said quietly. "Crane, hired men, shadows." Elias tilted his head slightly. "And you think you're different?" "Yes." Elias almost smiled. "Prove it." Behind him, one of his men pressed a gun to Henderson's head. "Drop the rifle," the man shouted. Caleb didn't move. Mary's voice came low behind him. "He wants you to react." "I know," Caleb replied without turning. Elias stepped forward, boots grinding into dirt. "You were never built for this," he said. "You hesitate, you question. That's why Hale trusted you, and why I never did." Caleb let the rifle lower slowly. Not drop, just lower. Elias watched carefully. "That's right," he said softly. "Think." Another building roof collapsed in the distance with a crash of sparks. Mary leaned closer to Caleb's shoulder. "Remember what Papa said," she whispered. Caleb didn't answer. He was remembering something else. The way Elias used to ride ahead on the trail, the way he always kept high ground, the way he never entered a fight without an exit. Caleb's eyes shifted, not to the men in front of him, to the rooftops. 2 figures moved there, not Elias's men, ranchers, armed, waiting. Elias noticed Caleb's glance. "You think they'll die for you?" he asked quietly. "They're not dying for me," Caleb said. A single rifle cracked from above. One of Elias's men dropped instantly. Chaos snapped the moment apart. Caleb moved, not toward cover, forward. He fired once, clean. The man holding Henderson fell backward. Mary darted sideways, pulling Henderson clear as more shots erupted from the rooftops. Elias stepped back fast, drawing his revolver. "You planned this?" he barked. Caleb's voice cut through the smoke. "No." Another shot from above dropped a second hired gun. The townsmen hadn't scattered. They'd regrouped. Elias realized it too late. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted over the gunfire. "It already did," Caleb replied. Bullets tore into the dirt around them. One of Elias's remaining men fled down an alley, cut down seconds later. Elias grabbed a fallen horse, using it as cover. Caleb advanced slowly, steady. Smoke and dust mixed thick in the air. "You always said power belongs to the man willing to spill blood," Caleb called out. Elias fired wildly, forcing him back a step. "And you're proving me right." "No," Caleb answered. "You are." Another rooftop shot clipped Elias's shoulder. He staggered but stayed upright. For the first time, fear cracked through his expression. Not fear of death, fear of losing control. The town was no longer silent. Men were shouting, riding in from side roads, guns raised. Crane's fear had held them down, but Crane was dead, and Elias had shown his face too soon. "You should have stayed buried," Caleb said. Elias's eyes burned. "You don't understand what it takes to hold land," he growled. "I do now." Elias lunged suddenly, firing one last shot. The bullet tore past Caleb's side, grazing his ribs. Caleb didn't stop. He stepped into the open, raised his revolver, and aimed directly at his father's chest. The street fell strangely quiet in that suspended second, smoke drifting, men frozen, Mary watching. Elias met his eyes. "No matter what you think," Elias said hoarsely, blood darkening his shirt, "you're still my son." Caleb's voice was steady. I stopped being your son the day you killed innocent men. Elias's grip weakened. But you'll finish what I started. Caleb didn't blink. No, he said. I'll end it. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed down the street like a final verdict. Elias Whitmore staggered once, then fell backward into the dust. This time, he didn't move. Silence settled slowly. The fire still burned at the far end of town, but the shooting stopped. Men stepped out from cover, breathing hard, alive. Mary walked forward carefully until she stood beside Caleb. She looked down at Elias's body. Is it over? She asked quietly. Caleb stared at the man who had shaped his life through lies. Yes, he said. Then after a beat, it is now. In the distance, church bells began ringing, not in panic, in signal. The town was still standing. By sunset, the fires were out. The town stood scarred but standing. 2 buildings lost, 1 life buried with no preacher to speak over him. Elias Whitmore was laid in the same dirt he had tried to claim as his own. No marker, no name, just earth. Sheriff Rollins survived. The bullet had passed through clean. He stood with his arm bandaged, overseeing the recovery of what remained of the records. The ledger was found half burned in the street where one of Elias's men had dropped it. Enough pages survived, enough signatures, enough proof. By morning, word would travel beyond the valley. By winter, the claims would be reviewed. By spring, ownership would change hands. But that night, the town gathered in silence. Not celebration. Relief. Caleb stood apart near the hitching post, staring down the long road that cut through the plains. Mary stepped beside him. They'll remember him as a monster, she said quietly. Yes. And you? Caleb didn't answer at first. They'll remember what happened, he said finally. That's enough. Mary looked up at him. You could have walked away, she said. I almost did. More than once. She studied his face carefully. Papa believed you wouldn't. Caleb exhaled slowly. Thomas believed in people more than they deserved. Mary shook her head. No. He believed in the moment they'd finally choose. Caleb looked down at her. And you? What do you believe? Mary didn't hesitate. That we ride home tomorrow. Home. The word settled heavy, but not wrong. The ranch still stood. The barn could be rebuilt. The land was theirs now, legally and truly. Caleb glanced toward the horizon one last time. No riders, no smoke, no shadows waiting on the ridge. Just open country. He rested a hand gently on Mary's shoulder. We start early, he said. Yes, sir. They walked back toward the house together. Behind them, the town worked through the night, rebuilding what it could. Ahead of them, the valley waited, quieter than it had been in 20 years. At the edge of the road, Caleb paused once more and looked back at the place where his father fell. Not anger, not grief, just finality, Mary noticed. You all right? She asked. Caleb nodded. For the first time, he said. The wind moved soft across the plains, carrying away the last of the smoke. And this time, nothing followed it.